The air left her lungs too fast. Mariah Sterling clawed at the silk bodice, crushing her ribs, black spots dancing across her vision as the chandelier above blurred into streams of gold. Around her, laughter and champagne glasses clinked in oblivious celebration while she drowned on dry land. Then a voice cut through the noise, low and commanding in accented English. Strong hands gripped her waist, fingers working at the laces with startling efficiency. She gasped as pressure released, oxygen flooding back, and looked up into the darkest eyes she'd ever seen. The stranger's face was beautiful and terrifying all at once, and something dangerous flickered in his expression when their gazes locked. Welcome to K-Seoul Afro Stories channel, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Mariah stumbled backward the moment she could breathe properly again, her hand flying to the loosened corset beneath her emerald gown. The man stepped back with practiced grace, his black suit immaculate despite having just prevented her from collapsing. He was tall, impossibly handsome in a way that seemed almost carved from stone, with sharp cheekbones and lips that looked like they rarely smiled. "You should fire whoever dressed you," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made it sound less like advice and more like a command. She wanted to snap back, but her throat still burned. Instead, she managed a hoarse, "Thank you." He studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not the leering assessment she'd grown accustomed to from men at these events, but something else. Something that felt like he was cataloging every detail, every vulnerability, every secret she tried to hide. "You don't belong here," he said finally. That stung more than it should have. "Neither do you, apparently. What kind of man knows how to unlace a corset that quickly?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. The kind who pays attention. Before she could respond, he turned and disappeared into the crowd with the same quiet authority he'd arrived with. Mariah pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat slowly return to normal. Except it didn't, not entirely. Something about those eyes lingered. The next day, Mariah tried to forget the encounter. She had enough complications without adding mysterious strangers to the list. Her job at the nonprofit kept her busy, coordinating housing assistance for families that the system had abandoned. The work was exhausting and underfunded, but it mattered. It was the only thing that made her feel less like a victim of her own past. She was leaving the office after dark when she noticed the black car idling across the street. Sleek, expensive, and completely out of place in this neighborhood. Her instincts screamed at her to walk faster, but before she could, the rear door opened. The man from the gala stepped out. Mariah froze, her keys clutched between her fingers like a makeshift weapon. He raised both hands in a gesture of peace, though something about him suggested he was never truly unarmed. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, moving closer with measured steps. "My name is Park Jin-woo. I wanted to make sure you were all right." "You followed me," she accused, her voice sharper than her racing pulse. "I had you looked into," he corrected, as if that were somehow better. "You're Mariah Sterling. 28. You work for New Beginnings Housing Initiative. You grew up in foster care. You have a scar on your left shoulder from a cigarette burn when you were 12. The blood drained from her face. "What the hell gives you the right?" "Nothing," Jin-woo said quietly. "But I need to know who I'm dealing with." "We're not dealing with anything. You helped me breathe. That's where this ends." She started to walk past him, but his next words stopped her cold. "You're still wearing that dress like armor. Still trying to prove you belong in rooms that were never built for people like us." Mariah turned slowly. "People like us?" Jin-woo's expression shifted, something raw flickering beneath the controlled exterior. "People who learn too young that the world is divided into predators and prey. That survival means becoming something you hate." The words hit too close to home. She wanted to deny them, to walk away, but her feet wouldn't move. Instead, she heard herself ask, "What do you want from me?" "Coffee," he said simply. "Tomorrow. Somewhere public if it makes you feel safer." Every instinct told her to refuse. Men who investigated women weren't men to trust. Men who looked at her like he did, like she was a puzzle he intended to solve, were dangerous in ways she'd spent years trying to avoid. But there was something in his eyes. Not kindness exactly, but recognition. Like he saw the parts of her she kept hidden and wasn't afraid of them. "One coffee," she said finally. And if you've had me followed again, I'm calling the police. Jin-woo nodded once, that almost smile returning. Fair enough. A few days later, Mariah arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a table by the window where she could watch the street. Jin-woo appeared exactly on time, carrying himself with the kind of confidence that turned heads. He ordered tea, she noticed. Not coffee. You don't drink coffee, she observed as he sat down. I lied, he admitted. I wanted to see you again. Coffee was just an excuse. The honesty startled her. Most men played games, hid behind charm or aggression. Jin-woo simply stated facts, as if anything else would be beneath him. Why? Mariah asked. You don't know me. I know enough, he replied, wrapping his hands around the cup. I know you're afraid right now. Not of me specifically, but of what I might want. What I might take. She swallowed hard. And what do you want? Jin-woo held her gaze. To understand why you looked at me like you recognized something at that gala. Like you'd seen whatever darkness I carry and weren't surprised by it. Mariah's breath caught. Because he was right. She had recognized something. The same hollow space behind the eyes that she saw in her own mirror. The same careful control that came from growing up in chaos. I grew up knowing that people hurt you, she said slowly. That trust is a luxury and survival is a skill. You have that same look. Like you're always calculating the exits. I am, Jin-woo said. Always. They talked for 2 hours. Not about anything deep at first, just surface things. He told her he'd been born in Seoul, moved to Chicago when he was 10. She told him about bouncing between foster homes, about the families who'd been kind and the ones who'd been anything but. Neither mentioned what they did for work beyond the basics. But when they finally left the cafe, Jin-woo walked her to her car and said something that made her pulse spike. I'm not a good man, Mariah. I need you to know that before this goes any further. This, she repeated. Whatever this is, he said, gesturing between them. Because I'm going to want to see you again. And you're going to say yes, even though you know you shouldn't. He was right, and that terrified her. Later that night, Mariah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment of their conversation. She should block his number. Delete the contact information he'd given her. Instead, she found herself wondering what he'd meant by not being a good man. The next day brought answers she didn't want. A friend from the nonprofit stopped by her apartment with a laptop and a grim expression. You need to see this, she said, pulling up a series of news articles. That man you were with yesterday? Someone took a photo. I did some digging. Mariah's stomach dropped as she read. Park Jin-woo wasn't just wealthy. He was powerful in ways that had nothing to do with legitimate business. The articles were careful, legally vague, but the implications were clear. He was connected to organized crime. Not peripherally, not distantly, but at the center of it. He's dangerous, her friend said. Like, actually dangerous. There are rumors about territorial disputes, about bodies that never get found. You need to stay away from him. Mariah knew she should listen. Instead, she found herself texting him, we need to talk. His response came immediately, tell me where. They met in a park after sunset, the kind of place too open for violence but too empty for witnesses. Jin-woo arrived alone, his hands visible, his expression unreadable. You looked into me, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Mariah replied. Are the rumors true? Which ones? All of them. Jin-woo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant skyline. Yes, he said finally. I run an organization. We control territory, manage certain businesses, enforce certain rules. People call it organized crime. I call it survival in a system that was rigged before we were born. People die, Mariah said, her voice shaking. Because of decisions you make. Yes. No excuses. No justifications. Just brutal honesty. Then why, she demanded. Why drag me into this? Why pursue someone you know deserves better? Jin-woo turned to face her fully, and for the first time, she saw genuine emotion crack through his control. Because when I saw you at that gala, drowning in a dress you wore like penance, I recognized myself. And when you looked at me without flinching, without the fear or disgust I usually see, I thought maybe there was someone in this world who could understand what it means to live in the margins. I'm not like you, Mariah whispered. No, he agreed. You're better. You took your pain and built something that helps people. I took mine and built walls with bodies. She should leave. She should run. Instead, she asked, do you want to be what you are? The question seemed to surprise him. No one's ever asked me that before. I'm asking now. Jin-woo looked away again, his jaw tight. I wanted to be an architect. I used to sketch buildings when I was young, dream about creating spaces where people felt safe. Then my father died and left me an empire I never asked for. By the time I realized what it meant, I was already too deep. Too many people depending on me. Too many enemies waiting for weakness. Mariah felt something crack in her chest. That's not an answer. No, he said softly. I don't want to be this. But I am. And I can't change that without getting a lot of people killed. The weight of his words settled between them. Mariah knew she should walk away. Every survival instinct screamed at her to protect herself. But she'd spent her whole life playing it safe, staying small, avoiding risk. And where had it gotten her? Alone. Scared. Still wearing metaphorical corsets that crushed the breath from her lungs. If I stay, she said carefully, if I let this continue, what happens? Jin-woo's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw past the dangerous man to something vulnerable beneath. I protect you. With everything I have. But I can't promise you won't get hurt. Tell me something real, she said over wine that tasted like velvet. Not about work or danger. Something that matters to you. Jin-woo considered the question, his fingers tracing the stem of his glass. I have a sister. Younger. She lives in Seoul, married to a professor. She doesn't know everything I do, but she knows enough. Every month, I send her money and she sends me drawings her daughter makes. Stick figures and houses with crooked windows. Mariah smiled despite herself. You keep them? In my office, he admitted. They remind me why I do this. Not the violence, but the protection. Making sure she never has to make the choices I did. She's lucky to have you. She'd disagree if she knew half of it. Their food arrived, and they ate slowly, the conversation flowing easier than it should have between two people from such different worlds. Jin-woo asked about her work, genuinely interested in the families she helped and the bureaucratic nightmares she navigated. Mariah found herself telling stories she rarely shared, about the woman who cried when she got housing after 3 years homeless, about the kid who drew her a thank you card with crayon flowers. You're doing what I wish I could, Jin-woo said quietly. Building instead of destroying. You could, Mariah said. It's not too late to change. His laugh was bitter. I've killed people, Mariah. Ordered deaths. There's no redemption for that. Maybe not, she said. But there's tomorrow. And the day after. You can't undo the past, but you can decide what you do next. Jin-woo looked at her like she'd said something profound, though she felt like she was just stating the obvious. Maybe that was the difference between them. She still believed in second chances. He'd stopped hoping for them years ago. After dinner, they walked along the lake, the city lights reflecting on dark water. Jin-woo stayed close, not touching but near enough that she felt his warmth. When they reached a quiet stretch of path, he finally spoke again. I want you to understand something, he said. If you're with me, people will use you to get to me. They'll threaten you, maybe try to hurt you. I can provide protection, but I can't guarantee your safety. Not completely. Mariah stopped walking, turning to face him. Why are you telling me this now? Because if I kiss you tonight, this becomes real. And I need you to make that choice with open eyes. Her heart slammed against her ribs. What if I'm already making it? Jin-woo moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her jaw with surprising gentleness. Then tell me to stop. She didn't. Instead, she rose on her toes and closed the distance between them. The kiss was nothing like she expected. Not aggressive or demanding, but careful. Almost reverent. Like he was trying to memorize the feel of her lips, the taste of wine on her breath, the small sound she made when his other hand settled on her waist. When they finally broke apart, Mariah's head was spinning. Jin-woo rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "Probably," she agreed. "I'm going to make it anyway." "Me too." The next few weeks blurred into a pattern that felt dangerously close to normal. Jin-woo took her to dinner, to galleries, to quiet places where they could talk without the weight of his reputation pressing down. He never hid what he was, but he tried to show her who he wanted to be. And Mariah, despite knowing better, fell. She fell for the way he listened when she talked about work, genuinely interested in the details. She fell for the small touches, his hand on her back when they walked, his fingers brushing hers across a table. She fell for the moments when his control slipped and she saw the man beneath the monster, the one who still sketched buildings in the margins of notebooks and sent money to his sister's kid. But reality had a way of intruding. Late one night, Mariah woke to her phone buzzing insistently. Jin-woo's name flashed on the screen, and when she answered, his voice was tight with pain. "I need you to listen carefully," he said. "Don't panic. I'm sending a car to your apartment. The driver's name is Kwon. He'll take you somewhere safe." "What's happening?" Mariah demanded, already pulling on clothes. "Territorial dispute. It got violent." "I'm fine, but people know about you now. They'll try to use that." "Where are you?" "Getting stitches," he said, and she heard the strain beneath the casual tone. "I'll come to you once I'm sure it's secure." The car arrived within minutes, driven by a broad-shouldered man who introduced himself as Kwon and said nothing else the entire drive. He took her to a building downtown, expensive and anonymous, where Jin-woo kept what he called a safe house. Jin-woo arrived an hour later, his shirt torn and blood-stained, a fresh bandage visible beneath. Mariah's hands shook as she helped him out of the ruined clothing, revealing bruises and cuts that made her stomach turn. "How bad?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "I've had worse," he said, which wasn't an answer. She cleaned the wounds he'd let her reach, her touch gentle despite the anger burning through her fear. This was his life. This was what she'd signed up for. But seeing it, feeling the heat of his blood on her hands, made it horrifyingly real. "Who did this?" she asked. "Rival organization. They've been pushing into our territory for months. Tonight they made their move. And you fought back." "Yes." Mariah pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Did anyone die?" Jin-woo's silence was answer enough. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't watch you bleed and pretend it's normal." He stood slowly, wincing at the movement, and crossed to where she stood by the window. "I know. And I'm sorry for pulling you into this. But I meant what I said. I'll protect you." "Who protects you?" she demanded, tears burning her eyes. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "No one needs to. I'm not worth protecting." "That's not true," Mariah said fiercely. "You're worth more than this life. More than blood and violence and nights like this." Jin-woo reached for her, his touch hesitant as if he expected her to pull away. When she didn't, he drew her close, his arms careful of his injuries. "I don't know how to be anything else," he said against her hair. "Then learn," she said. "Because I can't love someone who's already decided they're disposable." The word hung between them. Love. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't even realized she felt it until the confession slipped out. But now it was there, impossible to take back. Jin-woo pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes searching hers. "You shouldn't love me." "I know," Mariah said. "But I do anyway." He kissed her then, and this time it wasn't careful or gentle. It was desperate, hungry, like he was trying to prove something to both of them. Mariah kissed back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his hair, her body pressed against his despite the injuries. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jin-woo pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll find a way out," he promised. "I don't know how yet, but I will. For you." "For us," Mariah corrected. The next morning brought a different kind of violence. News reports of a shootout in a warehouse district, 5 dead, more injured. Mariah watched the coverage with growing horror while Jin-woo made phone calls in the next room, his voice low and commanding. When he finally emerged, his expression was grim. You need to leave Chicago. What? This is escalating faster than I anticipated. The people we're fighting don't have rules. They'll go after anyone connected to me, and you're a target now. Mariah shook her head. I'm not running. This isn't a choice, Jin-woo said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I've arranged for you to stay with family in Atlanta. You'll be safe there. And leave you here to die, she demanded. That's not happening. Mariah. No, she cut him off. You don't get to make this decision for me. I knew the risks. I chose this anyway. I'm not abandoning you now. Jin-woo's control cracked, frustration and fear bleeding through. You don't understand what these people are capable of. If they take you, if they hurt you to get to me, I won't survive it. Not because they'll kill me, but because I'll destroy everything and everyone to get you back, and the man who does that isn't someone you can love. The raw honesty of it stopped her cold. She saw the truth in his eyes, the barely leashed violence that he kept controlled for her sake. This was the monster everyone warned her about, and he was right. If she was hurt, he would become something worse than what he already was. Then don't let them take me, she said quietly. Keep me close. Protect me the way you promised. Jin-woo closed his eyes, a muscle working in his jaw. You're asking me to risk your life. I'm asking you to trust that I'm strong enough to handle this, she corrected. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be hidden away. I survived my childhood. I survived worse than you know. I can survive this. When he looked at her again, something had shifted in his expression. Not agreement exactly, but recognition that she wasn't going to back down. If you stay, he said carefully, you stay by my side. You don't go anywhere alone. You don't take risks. And if I tell you to run, you run without question. Deal, Mariah said. The following days tested that promise. Jin-woo moved her into his building, a fortress masquerading as luxury apartments. Security was everywhere, discreet but omnipresent. She couldn't leave without an escort, couldn't make calls without them being monitored. It should have felt like prison, but instead, it felt like the first time in her life someone actually gave a damn whether she lived or died. Jin-woo was gone more than he was present, handling the escalating conflict with a ruthlessness that both frightened and fascinated her. She saw him on the news sometimes, caught in background footage of crime scenes, his face carefully neutral. But when he came home at night, bloodied or exhausted or both, he let the mask drop. Those were the moments Mariah lived for. When he'd collapse on the couch and pull her against him, holding her like she was the only real thing in his violent world. When he'd tell her things he'd never admitted to anyone, fears and regrets and dreams he'd buried beneath duty. I think about leaving sometimes, he confessed one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. Just walking away from all of it. Taking you somewhere quiet where no one knows our names. Why don't you? Mariah asked, even though she already knew the answer. Because people depend on me. My organization provides jobs, protection, order in neighborhoods the police abandoned. If I leave, it fractures. Other groups move in, and the violence gets worse, not better. So you're trapped. We all are, Jin-woo said. By choices we made, by circumstances we inherited, by the fact that walking away would hurt more people than staying. Mariah turned in his arms to face him. What if you could transition out? Not abandon everything, but shift it. Make it legitimate. That takes time. And cooperation from people who don't want change. But it's possible. Jin-woo studied her face, hope and doubt warring in his expression. Maybe. If I could secure peace first, negotiate territory agreements, find successors who'd maintain the rules. It would take years. Then we have time, Mariah said. 3 weeks into their forced proximity, Mariah woke to find Jin-woo standing at the window, fully dressed despite the early hour. His shoulders were tense, and she knew before he spoke that something had changed. We have a meeting today, he said without turning. With the heads of 3 other organizations. It's a negotiation for territory division. Mariah sat up, pulling the sheet around her. That's good, right? Talking instead of fighting. Talking with men who respect nothing but power is always dangerous, Jin-woo replied. But yes. It's progress. Do you want me there? He finally turned to face her, something unreadable in his expression. Yes. But not in the room. I need you close, but not exposed. She understood what he wasn't saying. Her presence would be a statement, proof that he had something to lose, something worth protecting. It would make him seem human to men who trafficked in fear. The meeting took place in a private room at an upscale restaurant, the kind where no questions were asked about the men in expensive suits who arrived with visible weapons. Mariah waited in an adjacent lounge with Kwon, watching through a partially open door as Jin-woo negotiated with men whose faces she'd seen on police bulletins. He was magnificent in his element. Cold, calculating, utterly in control. He spoke in Korean mostly, his voice carrying authority that made even the older men defer. But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand never strayed far from his side where she knew he kept a gun. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Jin-woo emerged, his expression was neutral, but his eyes found hers immediately, checking that she was safe. That small gesture, barely noticeable to anyone else, made her chest tight. It went well, she asked when they were back in the car. As well as it could, Jin-woo said. We have a temporary peace. 30 days to work out the details. After that, either we have a treaty or we have war. 30 days, Mariah repeated. That's not much time. It's enough, he said, taking her hand. I've waited years for this opening. I'm not wasting it. The next few days brought a flurry of activity. Jin-woo met with lawyers, accountants, people who specialized in transforming criminal enterprises into legitimate businesses. It was complicated, dangerous work. Every step toward legitimacy revealed vulnerabilities that rivals could exploit. But he was determined, and Mariah watched him work with something close to awe. This was the man he could have been, should have been, if circumstances had been different. Strategic, brilliant, capable of building instead of destroying. She tried to help where she could, offering perspective from her non-profit work about community investment and social programs. Jin-woo listened, taking notes, incorporating her ideas in ways that surprised his associates. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and respect, this woman who somehow made their ruthless boss consider schools and housing projects. Late one evening, after a particularly long meeting, Jin-woo found her in his home office where she'd been reviewing proposals. He looked exhausted but satisfied, the kind of tired that came from productive work rather than violence. Come here, he said, holding out his hand. Mariah crossed to him, letting him pull her into his lap. He buried his face against her neck, breathing deep like her scent alone could ground him. I spoke to the city council today, he murmured against her skin. Unofficially. About developing the west side, the areas everyone's written off. They're interested if I can guarantee stability. Jin-woo, that's incredible, Mariah said, running her fingers through his hair. It's a start, he corrected. But it means something. It means maybe this life doesn't have to end in blood. She kissed him then, soft and slow, trying to convey everything she felt. Pride, hope, love so fierce it terrified her. Jin-woo responded with equal tenderness, his hands gentle on her waist, his lips mapping her face like he was memorizing every detail. I need to tell you something, he said when they finally broke apart. Something I should have said weeks ago. Mariah's heart stuttered. What? I love you, Jin-woo said simply. I'm not good at this, at feelings or vulnerability. But you need to know. You've become the reason I want to change, to be better. Not just for redemption or peace, but because I want to deserve you. Tears burned her eyes. You already do. No, he said firmly. But I will. I promise you, Mariah. I'll become a man you can be proud of. I'm already proud of you, she whispered. Every day I watch you choose something harder than violence. That takes more courage than anyone gives you credit for. Jin-woo kissed her forehead, holding her close. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, pretending the world outside didn't exist. 2 weeks into the peace agreement, everything fell apart. Mariah was at the non-profit office, finally allowed some supervised freedom now that tensions had cooled. She was reviewing housing applications when her phone rang. Not Jin-woo's number, but Kwon's. Get out now, he said the moment she answered. Back door. Black car waiting. What's happening? One of the organizations broke the treaty. They hit 3 of our locations simultaneously. Jin-woo's dealing with it, but they know about you. Move now. Mariah grabbed her bag and ran, her heart hammering. She made it to the back exit just as she heard shouting from the front of the building. Kwan's car screeched up, and she threw herself inside. "Where's Jin-woo?" she demanded as they sped away. Handling it, Kwan said grimly. "He'll meet you at the safe house." But Jin-woo didn't come to the safe house. Hours passed with no word, and Mariah paced the small space like a caged animal. She tried calling, texting, anything. No response. When the door finally opened near midnight, it wasn't Jin-woo. It was a man she'd seen at meetings, one of his lieutenants. His expression told her everything before he spoke. "There was a shootout," he said. "Jin-woo was hit. He's alive, but he's in surgery." The world tilted. Mariah grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. "Where?" "Private hospital." "I'll take you." The drive took forever and no time at all. Mariah barely registered the city passing outside the windows, her mind stuck on the image of Jin-woo bleeding, dying, gone. When they finally arrived at a nondescript building that looked nothing like a hospital from outside, she was shaking. Inside was different. Clean, professional, clearly set up for people who couldn't go to public facilities. A doctor met them in the hallway, still in surgical scrubs. "He's stable," the doctor said before Mariah could ask. "The bullet missed major organs, but he lost a lot of blood. He's unconscious but breathing on his own. You can see him." Mariah followed the doctor to a private room where Jin-woo lay in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. His face was pale, bruises blooming on his jaw and cheekbone. She pulled a chair to his bedside and took his hand, careful of the 4. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here. You don't get to leave me, understand? We have plans. You promised me a future." Jin-woo didn't respond, his breathing steady but shallow. Mariah stayed there through the night, dozing fitfully, waking at every sound or change in the monitors. He finally woke near dawn, his eyes fluttering open and immediately searching for her. When he found her, something in his expression eased. "You're safe," he rasped, his voice rough. "I'm fine," Mariah said, squeezing his hand. "You're the one who got shot." "Worth it," he said. "They were heading for you. I redirected them." "You idiot," she said, tears spilling over. "You beautiful, stupid idiot. You could have died." "But I didn't," Jin-woo said, trying to smile and wincing at the pain. "And you're here. That's all that matters." The doctor came in then, running checks and adjusting medication. Jin-woo would need weeks to recover fully, but he'd live. That was enough for now. Over the next few days, as Jin-woo healed, Mariah learned the full extent of what had happened. The rival organization had coordinated attacks across the city, targeting Jin-woo's businesses and associates. But Jin-woo had anticipated it, had moved key people and resources. The casualties were minimal, and the attackers had been captured or killed. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. Jin-woo's reputation as someone too dangerous to cross had been reinforced with blood. Any hope of a clean transition to legitimacy had been complicated by the need to respond with overwhelming force. "I'm sorry," he said one afternoon, his hand finding hers. "I know this isn't what you wanted." "What I want is you alive," Mariah said. "Everything else we can figure out." "They'll call me a monster now," Jin-woo said quietly. "The man who killed 15 people in one night. They won't remember I was protecting my people, that I gave them chances to walk away. They'll just see the bodies." "Then let them," Mariah said fiercely. "I know who you are. I know what you're capable of, both the darkness and the light. You don't need anyone else's approval." Jin-woo pulled her down gently, mindful of his injuries, and kissed her. It was soft, grateful, full of emotions he still struggled to voice. "Marry me," he said when they broke apart. Mariah's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me," Jin-woo repeated. "I know the timing is terrible. I know I'm lying in a hospital bed because someone tried to kill me. But I've never been more certain of anything. I want you in my life permanently, legally, irrevocably. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours. Jin-woo, Mariah started, her mind spinning. You can say no, he said quickly. I'll understand if this is too much, too fast, too dangerous. But I needed to ask. I need you to know that despite everything, despite the violence and chaos, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Mariah looked at him, this dangerous man who'd learned to be gentle for her, this killer who sketched buildings and sent money to his niece, this monster who loved her with terrifying intensity. Yes, she said. Jin-woo's expression transformed, something bright and fierce replacing the perpetual control. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, Mariah confirmed. Because you're right. Despite everything, despite the danger and the darkness, I've never been happier than I am with you. So yes. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his good arm pulling her as close as his injuries allowed. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I'll get you a ring, Jin-woo promised. Something perfect. Something that shows the world you're spoken for. I don't need perfect, Mariah said. I just need you. Alive, healing, and figuring out how to build that future you promised. Then that's what I'll give you, he said. Jin-woo recovered faster than the doctors predicted, driven by the same ruthless determination he applied to everything. Within 2 weeks, he was back to work, moving carefully but refusing to show weakness. The rival organization had been dealt with, their leadership dead or scattered, their territory absorbed. But something had changed in Jin-woo. The violence, the near-death experience, had clarified his priorities in a way nothing else could. He accelerated plans for legitimacy, pushing harder on business acquisitions and community development. He met with politicians, business leaders, anyone who could help transition his empire from criminal to corporate. It was exhausting work, made harder by people who wanted to keep him trapped in his old life. But Jin-woo was nothing if not persistent, and he had something now he'd never had before. A reason beyond survival to change. Mariah supported him however she could, using her non-profit connections to build bridges to communities that had every reason to distrust him. It was slow, painstaking work. But gradually, people began to see what she saw. A man trying to be better, to use his power for something beyond violence. 3 months after the proposal, Jin-woo came home with a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, elegant and simple, a single diamond set in platinum. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, perfect in a way that showed he'd paid attention to her taste. I wanted to do this properly, he said, getting down on one knee despite Mariah's protest. Mariah Sterling, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a man who's still learning how to be human, who loves you more than he thought possible, who promises to spend every day proving he deserves you? Mariah pulled him up, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes. For the 100th time, yes. He slid the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Jin-woo approached everything with the same meticulous attention to detail, and loving her was no exception. They set the wedding for 2 months out, enough time to plan something small and meaningful. Neither wanted a spectacle, just close friends and family bearing witness to their commitment. Jin-woo's sister flew in from Seoul, bringing her husband and daughter. Mariah was nervous about meeting them, worried they'd see her as a complication in Jin-woo's already dangerous life. But his sister embraced her immediately, tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said in accented English. Thank you for loving my brother. For seeing past what he does to who he is. He's been alone so long. I worried he'd forgotten how to let anyone close. He's easy to love, Mariah said honestly. Even when he's being stubborn and overprotective. Jin-woo's niece, a shy 8-year-old, presented Mariah with a drawing. It showed stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun, labeled in careful English, Uncle Jean and Mariah. It's perfect, Mariah said, crouching to hug the little girl. I'm going to frame this. Jin-woo watched the exchange with an expression Mariah had never seen before. Soft, unguarded, genuinely happy. This was what he fought for, she realized. Not power or territory, but moments like this. Family, connection, the simple joy of people who mattered being together. The night before the wedding, Jin-woo found Mariah on the balcony of their apartment, staring at the city lights. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin resting on her shoulder. Second thoughts, he asked quietly. Never, Mariah said. Just thinking about how impossible this seemed 6 months ago. How sure I was that getting involved with you would destroy me. Did it? Jin-woo asked. Mariah turned in his arms to face him. No. It saved me. You saved me. From a half-life where I was just surviving, never actually living. You showed me what it means to feel something real, even when it's terrifying. You did the same for me, Jin-woo said. I was dead inside before you. Going through motions, existing but not living. You gave me a reason to want more than just survival. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the city breathed around them. Tomorrow they'd make it official, bind their lives together in front of everyone who mattered. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, it was just them. Two people who'd found each other in the margins of the world and decided to build something new. The wedding took place in a garden on the outskirts of the city, private and heavily secured but beautiful. White flowers everywhere, soft music, late afternoon sun turning everything golden. Mariah wore a simple dress, elegant without the suffocating constraints of the gala gown that had brought them together. Jin-woo wore a black suit, his hair styled back, looking every inch the powerful man he was. But when Mariah walked down the makeshift aisle, his expression cracked. She saw the boy he must have been once, before violence and duty hardened him. She saw vulnerability, love, hope. It made her own eyes burn with tears. The ceremony was short, officiated by a judge Jin-woo had helped years ago. The vows were traditional, but when Jin-woo spoke them, they sounded like promises carved in stone. I take you, Mariah, to be my wife. To love and protect, to honor and cherish, for as long as I live. You are my redemption, my purpose, my home. Everything I am, everything I have, is yours. Mariah's voice shook when she responded. I take you, Jin-woo, to be my husband. To love and support, to challenge and believe in, for as long as I live. You are my strength, my hope, my heart. Together, we are unstoppable. When the judge pronounced them married, Jin-woo kissed her with a gentleness that belied his reputation. It was a kiss full of promise, of futures they'd build together, of a love strong enough to survive anything. The reception was intimate, just 30 people who truly mattered. Jin-woo's associates mixed awkwardly with Mariah's non-profit colleagues, two worlds colliding in unexpected ways. But the atmosphere was warm, celebratory. For one night, the violence and danger felt far away. Jin-woo danced with Mariah under string lights, holding her close, swaying to music that was too slow for the tempo. I love you, he murmured against her hair. More than I have words for. More than I knew was possible. I love you too, Mariah said. My dangerous, complicated, beautiful husband. He smiled, real and unguarded, and in that moment, Mariah knew they'd be okay. Not perfect, not safe, but together. And that was enough. Later, when most guests had left, Jin-woo pulled Mariah aside. I have something for you, he said, leading her to a quiet corner of the garden. He handed her a folder, thick with documents. Mariah opened it, confused, then gasped as she understood. Property deeds, business registrations, trust fund documentation. Jin-woo had created a foundation in her name, funded with substantial resources, dedicated to housing and community development. This is yours, he said. Completely independent of me or my organization. Legitimate money, legal structures, everything above board. I want you to build what you've always dreamed of. I want to help you create spaces where people feel safe. Mariah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. This wasn't just a gift. It was proof that he listened, that he understood what mattered to her, that he was serious about changing his legacy. Jin-woo, she finally managed. This is incredible. How long have you been planning this? Since the day you told me about that kid with the crayon flowers, he admitted. I wanted to give you the resources to make more moments like that happen. To prove that something good can come from even the darkest places. Mariah threw her arms around him, holding tight. Thank you. For this, for everything, for believing we could have this. Thank you for making me believe it, Jin-woo said. They stayed in the garden until dawn broke over the city, talking about plans and dreams and the future they'd build together. It wouldn't be easy. Jin-woo still had enemies, still carried the weight of his past. Mariah still had nightmares, still struggled with trusting that happiness could last. But they had each other. And that, they were learning, was the foundation everything else could be built on. 6 months after the wedding, Jin-woo successfully negotiated a truce with the remaining major organizations in the city. Territory was divided fairly, rules were established, and mechanisms for dispute resolution were put in place. It wasn't perfect peace, but it was sustainable. Violence dropped dramatically across neighborhoods that had known nothing but conflict for decades. Jin-woo began transitioning his holdings aggressively, moving money into construction, real estate development, and technology investments. It would take years to completely legitimize his empire, but progress was undeniable. Politicians who'd once avoided him now sought his input on urban development. Community leaders who'd feared him cautiously accepted his funding for youth programs and housing initiatives. Mariah's foundation flourished, providing housing assistance to hundreds of families in its first year. She worked closely with Jin-woo's development projects, ensuring that gentrification didn't just displace poor communities but actually served them. It was the kind of work she'd always dreamed of doing, but now with resources that could make real change. They were happy. Imperfectly, complicatedly, but genuinely happy. Jin-woo still had bad days, when the weight of what he'd done threatened to crush him. Mariah still had moments of panic, when she remembered how easily she could have lost him. But they faced those moments together, supporting each other through the darkness. One evening, almost a year after the wedding, Mariah found Jin-woo in his home office. He was sketching, something he did more often now. Not buildings under construction, but designs for community centers, parks, spaces where people could gather safely. "What are you working on?" she asked, coming to stand behind him. "A proposal for the West Side development," Jin-woo said. "Mixed-use buildings with affordable housing, ground-floor businesses for local entrepreneurs, green spaces for kids. I want to prove that development doesn't have to mean displacement." Mariah studied the sketch, seeing not just buildings but vision. Hope. A man who dealt in death learning to create life. "It's beautiful," she said. Jin-woo set down his pencil and pulled her into his lap. "You're beautiful. And you're the reason any of this matters. Before you, I was just surviving, maintaining power for its own sake. You gave me purpose beyond violence. You showed me what redemption could look like." "You did that yourself," Mariah corrected. "I just believed in you while you figured it out." "That was everything," Jin-woo said softly. "Knowing someone saw past the monster to something worth saving. You changed my life, Mariah. You made me want to be better." "You are better," she said, kissing him gently. "Every day you choose creation over destruction, that's who you are now. Not who you were, but who you're becoming." Jin-woo held her close, his face buried against her neck. "I love you," he said, the words coming easier now. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." "You already do," Mariah said. "But I'll take the lifetime together anyway." They stayed like that as evening deepened into night, two people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The past couldn't be erased, and the future was never guaranteed. But they had now, and they had each other. And for two people who'd spent most of their lives just trying to survive, that was a kind of miracle all its own. Outside the window, the city lights glittered like fallen stars. Jin-woo's empire stretched across those streets, still dangerous in places, still marked by violence he couldn't completely leave behind. But it was changing. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely changing. Because sometimes love was enough to start a revolution. Sometimes one person believing in you was all it took to remember you were human underneath the armor. Sometimes the most dangerous men were capable of the greatest tenderness, and the most wounded hearts held the most capacity for hope. Jin-woo and Mariah had learned that lesson the hard way. But they'd learned it together, and that made all the difference. As they sat in the quiet office, dreaming of buildings and futures and lives they'd save, they were proof that redemption was possible. That love could flourish even in darkness. That two broken people could build something whole. And that, in the end, was the most beautiful thing of all.